It is 1 o'clock. This is Friday, March 16th, and I'm going to call this special meeting of the Metro Flood Diversion Authority in order. Would you do roll call, please?
Yes. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson? Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Wayland? Dr. Mahoney? Mr. Pepcorn? Mr. Grinberg?
Here.
Mrs. Sherling?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Mr. Thorsted?
Here.
Mr. Olson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Is that everyone? Okay, great. So we will then start with the presentation regarding our Plan B project alignment and the application for Minnesota DNR's permit. Are you doing that, Jason?
All right. Yes.
Great,
Good
thank you.
afternoon, Mayor. Afternoon, Mayor. Thank you. We'll be triple teaming this presentation today. I'm going to start off with a little bit of the background, which through the Governor's Task Force and what got us here today. Then I'll be turning over to Nathan to cover the new Plan B, and we'll follow up with Bob finishing out the presentation. So first, why are we here? Focused on flood protection for the Fargo-Moorhead area, getting the new Minnesota permit application submitted, and to discuss how the project has changed. So why the project's changed, and I know all of the members of the Diversion Authority have been well-versed in this, but with the lawsuit from Wilkin, Richland, JPA, and resulting in the injunction last fall, which then halted the construction on inlet control structure as well as other operations. So since that injunction went in place, we've really focused on trying to move this project and move the process forward. First, with the two governors getting together, meeting, working to develop the Governor's Task Force process, and which resulted in 5 critical meetings over the end of 2017, and also the formation of our technical group, which we were able to then utilize during the Governor's Task Force and post-Governor's Task Force to make recommendations and to come up with this new plan. And then finally, the policy group that has also been meeting since the Governor's Task Force focused on the policy impacts of these different changes. So the Governor's Task Force, really the focus was on how to achieve balanced flood protection for the region with the critical parameters, how we can conform to the Minnesota DNR and Minnesota law as well as North Dakota law through permitting processes, and making sure that the project, as we look at modifications and changes, stayed a project that was still had authorization through the federal government and the Corps of Engineers, and also on the funding side, making sure that it's that any changes were being able to be managed financially through both the federal, state, and local funding. One of the first really big challenges that the Governor's Task Force took on was evaluating the 100-year floodplain. And this had been an area of contention over the years as what is the 100-year floodplain. And I thought this was a critical success of the Governor's Task Force right away to get out. We looked at what the current FEMA floodplain is, so what we're operating under today only has the data from the early 1900s to 1971. All the flood events since then are not included in that hydrology. So what had been looked at by the Corps of Engineers, they had this EOE wet period data from 1942 to 2009, and that was what had previously been utilized by the Corps through the Corps process. And in the end, what the Governor's Task Force recommendation was to use the full period of record for the data that we had, which is up basically from the early 1900s up to 2009, and which results in a 33,000 cubic feet per second flood event. And that's what the 100-year, so for all of the maps and everything that we're showing the existing 100-year floodplain, it's utilizing that data for the 33,000 CFS flood. Another critical component to the Governor's Task Force was the formation of the Technical Advisory Group. This was formed up initially with 3 members of the Diversion and 3 members from the DNR. Post Governor's Task Force, then the TAG was also included a member from the Corps of Engineers and an engineer representative from the upstream JPA. And again, their focus was the balanced flood protection, trying to balance the impacts and benefits on both sides of the river. And another critical piece was, reducing the new impacts in Richland and Wilkin County below that 640 acres or 1 square mile of new impacts. And then the final bullet there, really making sure that it's still an economically feasible project. Throughout the Governor's Task Force, the real critical consensus items that were the result of the Governor's Task Force, again, the 100-year flood being recognized at 33,000 CFS, allowing 37 feet of flow through town. That was a big change. When the project was originally developed, it was 30 feet of flow through town. Over the years, it had been increased to 35 feet, and now moving up to 37 feet. And that was really a big change because that allowed some of the other significant modifications that have been a result of this process to move forward. We also looked at the western tieback on the North Dakota side, south of Horace, and the eastern tieback levee. And again, it was discussed at the Governor's Task Force of distributed storage, which we're all in favor of distributed storage. It's a great thing for the region and for not just the main stem of the Red, but the other tributary rivers that distributed storage can benefit. But we also recognize that it's not a standalone method to get certifiable permanent flood protection for our community. Again, thanks to the members of the Governor's Task Force, especially those that are here today and members of the Diversion Authority. And, I think the Governor's Task Force really got us moving towards getting a permittable project and getting the ideas moved forward for the TAG and the policy group to then continue to take and get us to the point where we're at today. At this time, I'll turn over to Nathan to talk through Plan B.
And Jason, just to that point, Levi Bachmeyer is in the audience here from the governor's office, so he was part and partial working with the governor on this. So.
Absolutely.
Levi, will you stand up so the audience can see you? And we can give you a round of applause. Thank you. Had to embarrass you.
So with all the work that Jason was just mentioning, TAG continued to meet after the Governor's Task Force to continue to refine and analyze and look at different alignments. Out of this, we came up with what we are now calling Plan B. So what is Plan B exactly? Well, first I'd call your attention to the diversion channel itself. So the blue line on the map there is what was, I should say, the original diversion channel alignment and still is the planned diversion channel alignment. It's not to say that we didn't necessarily look at potential different alignments. We did, and Bob will hit on those here a little bit later. But for the Plan B, we are recommending carrying forward with the diversion channel as it was previously studied. Next, you'll see that we still have identified the need for a southern embankment and associated control structures on the Red, Wild Rice, and Diversion Inlet. That southern embankment is necessary to temporarily store the floodwaters south of town, so that way we can control those downstream impacts and make sure that we aren't having downstream impacts beyond our project. And then, of course, with increasing the flows, as Jason mentioned, to flows of 37 feet through town, we do know that additional levees have to be completed within Fargo and Moorhead as well by increasing those flows. So here, quick, is just what our 100-year floodplain looks like based off of that 100-year flow, or the 33,000 cubic feet per second that came out of the governor's task force recommendation. So anywhere you see blue here is an area where we would expect the 100-year floodplain to be. This is what the project, or Plan B, would still provide for protection for our communities or our region. So you can still see, toggling between the two here, that the project still does provide a very large benefit for our regions, but you can also see that like down by the Wilder Ice and the Red River confluence, with allowing 37 feet through town, there's going to be some residual floodplain that's going to remain, as well as up on the north side of town. You can see the backwater effect up there. There'll still be floodplain that will still exist within the protected area, with allowing these more flows through town. So what does increased flow through town mean? Well, it means that on average, the project will now operate once in about every 20 years. Previously at 35 feet, it was about once on every 10 years. So by allowing 2 more feet to flow through the communities on a 100-year event, we have decreased the time periods that the project would have to potentially operate. So you can see in the full period record of the Fargo River gauge, we have actually only experienced 5 floods that have exceeded a stage of 37 feet. And of those 5 floods, only 28 days have actually been above 37 feet. So diving into the southern embankment changes a little bit here. So first we'll hit on the eastern tieback levee. Previously, the embankment in Minnesota, once it crossed the Red River, continued straight east. Straight east till it hit high ground, and then the staging area was basically in that entire map that you'd see on the right-hand side. Now, Plan B identifies the southern embankment to cross the Red River south of the confluence of Wolverton Creek. Once it crosses into Minnesota, it will parallel Wolverton Creek until it intersects Highway 75, and at that point it will follow Highway 75 until the county line. So the yellow line termination point there is the county line between Clay County and Wilkin County. So some of the benefits of this shift alone is that it eliminates the requirement to have a ring levee around the city of Comstock. So that is no longer a necessity for our project. It also eliminates the need to do grade raises on Highway 75 and the railroad that goes through Comstock. Another large benefit with this alignment shift is that the organic farms that were previously impacted, right around 2,900 acres of them, we've reduced that now to 300 acres. So there's quite a few shifts that we have been able to accomplish there. It's important to note that this shift really couldn't occur, though, until we allowed that 37 feet through town. So that is a key component of the overall Plan B, is allowing that additional flow through town of 37 feet. That opened up the opportunities for us to start playing with these alignments a little bit more. The revised western tieback levee. Previously, the western tieback levee followed County Road 17 straight south. So right where the yellow and purple line meet there is the County Road 17. Straight south is the western tieback levee used to go. Now we're proposing to head off to the southwest of Horace and follow a natural ridge that is out there. And what this does is help further balance the impacts between the two states, just like the eastern tieback levee, and also reduces the impacts in Richland and Wilkin County. So the last component of the southern embankment that shifted under Plan B was west of I-29. This shift, as you can see here on the yellow line, moves the dam or the southern embankment about 2 miles north of County Road 16. The previous alignment was basically followed or paralleled County Road 16 over to the interstate. This shift, again, significantly helps balance those impacts, which was one of the goals that came out of the governor's task force, balance the impacts between the two states. It also really helps reducing those impacts in Richland and Wilkin. It also, between the combination of the eastern tieback levee and this alignment shift, allows us to remove 4 cemeteries that were previously impacted with the pre-task force alignment to now they're no longer impacted by the staging area. This alignment, though, does require us to purchase 20 additional homes, though, that previously were not required as a buyout. So balancing the impacts. On the left-hand side, the pre-task force alignment, you can see the staging area, the bottom left there, there's about a 60-40 split between the two states. So 60% of the staging area was in North Dakota, about 42% in Minnesota. The protected area, though, was an 80% in North Dakota and about a 20% in Minnesota. So there was not a balanced project, in the DNR's eyes at that point. Plan B, we believe, hits that balance. We believe that we have now, as you can see with the pie chart there, that we're now at an 81-19 split for both the protected and staging area acres between the two states. Another important thing to point out here too is that if you look at the protected acres numbers, the total of those are about 7,000 acres less protected now between pre-task force versus Plan B. That was another one of the governor's task force goals, was to reduce the impacts or reduce the removal of the 100-year floodplain with the project. So we are able to reduce about 7,000 acres of that. So here is the temporary storage area. It's kind of more blown up view. The dark blue on the map is the existing 100-year floodplain. The light blue is the newly inundated floodplain as a total. That's the entire staging area that we're proposing. You can see on the right-hand side in Minnesota, the hatching over there, that is where the old staging area was located. So you can see the orange gold boxes there. Those are those organic farms I mentioned previously that are no longer impacted by our project. So last couple maps here. Here is additional depth of flooding in the staging area. So left-hand side is a pre-task force plan, right-hand side is a Plan B. So this illustrates the number of days that a parcel of land would see, additional days that a parcel of land would see floodwaters on it with the operation of the project for a 100-year event. You can see, though, that on the right-hand side, in right where like the Clay County text is, that is really where we have been able to switch or change the staging area. As well as down in Rich and Wilkin County, you can see that we've shrunk that staging area of how far it went down into those counties before quite significantly. Here's another map that illustrates kind of the changes between the two staging areas. This one here is the additional depth of water, but real similar illustration of the previous map of you can see the shifts that have occurred when we utilize Plan B, or the alignment for Plan B for a staging area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Nathan. As part of the not only task force process, but the follow-up work of the technical group, we looked at a number of different alignments. We're not going to belabor the discussion today with every detail, but there is one alignment issue that we would like to provide some information on. This is new to those of you that haven't seen this presentation before, so hopefully this is good background information for you. This is the northwest channel alignment that had been proposed. If you look at the map, you'll see sort of an orangish red line that snakes its way through the area. That was the original proposal brought forth to the technical group. Through some additional discussion and refinement, that ended up being the yellow line that goes through. So this is the downstream end of the diversion channel, right? The purple on that map shows the proposed, as part of Plan B, alignment of the channel. You'll notice just by glancing at that the footprint of the proposed northwest revision, the JPA northwest alignment, is quite a bit wider than the purple line, and that is factually correct. The proposed JPA alignment actually would intersect the Cheyenne River at grade, and due to some hydraulic issues and to avoid raising the level of water in the diversion channel, that alignment would require a shallower, wider channel. It's definitely shorter, but it would need to be shallower and wider. So some of the benefits that this would bring would be an elimination of the Maple River Aqueduct. It would eliminate the channel abandonment for the Rush and Lower Rush, as well as the structures to drop those rivers into the diversion channel. In terms of what does it do to the staging area, so what's shown here are the reductions in elevation. So going from the pre-task force project to Plan B as being presented today, there was about a 2/3 of a foot reduction in the staging area. If you add in the proposed northwest alignment, that yellow line, you would get an additional reduction in elevation of about 1.4 feet. Now, I understand that those elevation numbers probably don't mean a whole lot to anybody unless you tie those to acres, right? So on this slide, on the right-hand side, this is the reduction in newly inundated area within the upstream staging part of the project. So if you take Plan B plus Northwest and subtract Plan B, those are the additional acres. So in Cass County, you could reduce upstream staging by an additional 2,200 acres, Clay County 476, and you can see the rest of those numbers. Valid reductions to weigh against other impacts of implementing that alignment. Because the channel is wider, it requires longer bridges, which is an additional cost measure. Because of the location of the alignment, we expect it would require 2 additional bridges to be constructed. The larger footprint has obviously a bigger land impact, about 1,700 acres. Again, those are permanent impacts as opposed to the impacts you see in the table, which are temporary impacts again. So just for Cass County alone, the temporary impacts, 2,200 versus permanent of 1,700. It's also important to note that the property rights area, that's the area where the Diversion Authority needs to acquire flowage easements, is not driven by the 100-year flood. All of these numbers are 100-year flood event numbers. That property rights area is driven by dam safety criteria and what's called the inflow design flood, which is about a 200,000 cubic foot per second flood. So essentially, all of those acres in that table would still require flowage easements regardless. When you take into consideration the elimination of the aqueduct, the elimination of the Rush and Lower Rush channel abandonments, but then add in the cost increases for bridges, additional lands that need to be acquired, the net additional cost to implement this proposed northwest alignment, which is not a part of Plan B, is about $112 million. What did not make this cut of the slides, which was finished like minutes ago, are additional impacts to structures. There's probably an additional, not probably, there is an additional about 50 residential structures that would be impacted by this alignment. And then lastly, for that area between the orange or yellow versus the purple alignment, there's about 1,500 people in about 579 primary structures. So that would not receive protection if this were implemented as part of Plan B. Again, it's not being proposed as part of Plan B, and some of the logic that went into it not being proposed as part of Plan B is contained in these 2 slides. Obviously, that's not a technical decision, that's a policy decision, but the permit application that's before the board today does not include this, and these are some of the technical reasons it's not included in that permit application. So what's next? Today, the board will be considering submittal of a new permit application to the DNR. Community outreach is ongoing. A number of these meetings have been held, a number yet to be held. I think most have been scheduled, maybe not quite all of them, but that'll be taking place over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then obviously during the permitting process, there will be public comments solicited, at least from the various jurisdictions that represent people in across the whole region. On the technical and financial side of this effort, the Plan B alignment is essentially still a line on a map. It needs a lot more detailed analysis, what we call micrositing, opportunities to slide that feet, not miles, to avoid, for example, existing properties. We'll need to develop a new cost estimate, including these changes, but as well as bring the previous costs to current day dollars, and then with that, work on the funding and financial plan. So with that, the three of us would be happy to try to tackle any questions you might have.
Tim?
Just want to thank the technical group for working so hard on this. I know you guys spent a lot of time and effort on it, and I know you looked at almost everything you could look at, so want to thank the team for doing such hard work, and even didn't interrupt your vacation, Bob, so I'm happy to hear that.
Madam Chair,
Tony?
I'm not sure who wants to take a crack at this, but at our commission meeting this week, I had described in my view that we're at step 7 of a 10-step process. Step 8 is submitting the permit application. Step 9, figuring out how we're going to pay for it. And 10 is when we cut the ribbon when it opens. I would like just some comment on, from the work on the technical side, what material has changed that's going to drive cost? I don't want to get into numbers, you don't have the numbers, but what materially changed that will increase the cost? And as I look at the slides, you know, there might be another mile, 3/4 of a mile of southern embankment that wasn't in the original plan. Obviously, that's driving some cost. That would be material. What else? And then if you have any comment on, from Plan A to Plan B, on Minnesota costs, I'd like some comment on that as well, because we have talked, and the good work of both mayors on the policy group, what's Minnesota's participation, and whether it's been reported in the press or some comments, discussions we've had, Minnesota's going to pay their share of this cost on the Minnesota side. I don't know what that means or what that is. Hopefully, if you don't have an answer to that today or a comment, that we're going to get there, because I think this has to be part of the discussion in Bob's slide and how we're going to pay for this and the financing.
So yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, what's driving a potential cost increase on the new Plan B alignment? You hit the first one right on the head, is the additional length of dam. We have 3.3 miles, I believe, additional length of dam versus, on Plan B versus a pre-task force alignment. So that is one of the larger costs, as well as land costs. We know that we're starting to get in an area that the land costs has higher dollar values associated with it, because it is getting closer to the metro area and has potential development in the future. You know, whether that's 10, 15 years down the road, there is a higher cost than some of the land a little bit further south, where it's further away from a development core or a metro area core. Those are probably your two biggest drivers, as well as the in-town levy costs. We also know that there's going to be, with the additional flows through town, additional work being necessary. Bob and I still have on our list to do a thorough vetting of all those areas that will get accomplished here over the next month or so, and get a better idea of exactly how many of those areas get added. But for the Fargo side, it really ties to our revised comp plan. A lot of those areas we are already doing, but there probably are going to be a few other small areas that will have to get done, but not whole neighborhoods, smaller pieces here and there.
So with respect to the costs in Minnesota, there's the in-town costs as part of the task force. We talked about additional work to do in the city of Moorhead. At that time, we estimated $50 million. It might be a little bit on the strong side, but as Nathan mentioned, we have some more work to do to fully define that. And the other, I think, well, obvious cost is land acquisition costs in Minnesota. I think our early estimates of that are probably in the $40 to $45 million range. So those two combined, somewhere between $90 and $100 million total. Early estimates.
Is it all right if we just hold you to 100? Would that be fine?
So the one thing I didn't add in too is that there are some cost savings as well with this alignment. On the Minnesota side, we are seeing probably a $50 to $60 million cost savings due to the Highway 75 road raise no longer being necessary, the Comstock levy, the railroad, those organic farms. So we are seeing a cost savings associated with that too, but overall, there will be a net increase.
From the county standpoint, there'll be some additional costs as well, going to 37 feet, both on the south end in Stanley Township, but also on the north end of the project along the Red River, both on the Clay County and the Cass County side. I don't foresee a significant number of additional home buyouts, but definitely road raises and other road improvements to maintain access during a 37-foot flood event.
Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor. Question, when we go from the 35 to 37 feet, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the need to increase some levee work in the metro area on both sides. And maybe a question to Bob, in particular to the Minnesota side. Are we going to see any areas where home buyouts will have to occur now that did not before? And if so, can you give us an idea as to how many that would be?
I'll give you an idea and just caveat this with, as Nathan had mentioned, we have a little more work to do to fully define exactly what that is. What's left to do would involve those areas that had not previously been considered, which the north side of Moorhead, south of the project that was completed by the Watershed District. We're actually working on a project in that area right now. The balance of the work that would need to be done would essentially be gaps in the current line of protection. If you considered the most conservative case, it could be as many as 70 acquisitions. I suspect when we do this more detailed analysis, that number is going to go down. Maybe as much as half, but that's probably optimistic. So that's essentially filling those gaps is the biggest part of it.
Thank you.
Mike?
Question for the engineers, and I know you haven't studied it at depth, but regarding that northwest proposed route by the JPA, is there any consideration or concern about the operation of the Cheyenne Diversion Project in West Fargo? You talked about a crossing at grade, and as proposed, it would be just north of where the Cheyenne Diversion empties into the river, and I guess obviously as a West Fargoan, I'd be very concerned about the operation of our diversion and what backwater or what problems that may create.
We'll ask Lyndon Pease to speak on that with Houston Moore Group. They're the ones that were doing the modeling for that.
Good afternoon. Yeah, there was some concern with a grade structure at the Cheyenne River in the northwest diversion. Essentially, instead of having an aqueduct structure that would go, that would allow the Cheyenne to go above the diversion channel, this basically just puts the rivers together. And so there was a little bit of backwater that would be coming in up the West Fargo diversion. We had just done some preliminary analysis with that, and it was close to existing as it was already today. And one of the contributing factors to that really was that the flood levels today without any FM diversion project would allow about 4,600 CFS through the entire West Fargo diversion system. The FM diversion project is cutting that in about half already. So you're already seeing a benefit just from the FM diversion south of Horace. But there was concern and still would be concern with potential erosion and maybe some of that diversion water north of town in the northwest diversion backing up and potentially getting into the West Fargo protected area. So that's certainly one of the concerns.
Yeah, I know citizens of West Fargo would be very concerned if it affected that operation.
Joel?
Bob, this question's for you. Just kind of digging into some more analysis from Kevin's question. So if I understand you right, there's about 70 structures in Moorhead right now that are sitting along the river in gaps of our flood protection. And we've maintained a kind of come as you are attitude with those buyouts. With this change, are we going to have to look at mandatory buyouts of those properties in order to finalize the diversion project?
Certainly, there will be a need to do that for some of those properties that are critical to getting levee alignments that are at the necessary elevation. There may be some other properties that, for example, are outside the levee alignment that maybe could be handled differently, but that's a decision for future discussion.
Thank you.
Chuck?
Bob, this one's for you too. When you say filling gaps, is there like a number you have in mind, or is it approximate? Is it like gaps of land?
Yeah, it's essentially,
Gaps in the levee.
boils down to those, and for the most part, those properties that we previously offered voluntary acquisitions to that declined,
Okay.
that are at a lower elevation. Not all of them, some of them are higher elevation, but those at a lower elevation.
Thanks.
And Mayor, can I ask a follow-up to it? So going to 37 in Moorhead, the work that was done there to be certifiable with the freeboard and everything, are there some of those levees that would have to be built up as well, or are they all good?
No, everything that's been completed to date would be fine.
Okay.
It's just additional work.
And that would include the project you referenced with the Buffalo Red in?
Correct.
Was the Oakport area?
Correct.
All right.
I like this for all the people that kept thinking Moorhead is done, right? Mary?
Thank you. Just for clarification, how many additional homes in Cass County will need to be bought out in the staging area? And then, do you have any estimate of how many homes will be need to be bought out that won't meet that 37-foot grade outside the staging area, both north and south?
I'll take the second questions first here while Nathan's looking up the numbers for the first question. Both on the south side in Stanley Township along the Wild Rice and Red, and then on the north end in Reed and Harwood Townships along the Red River. We've done a lot of our FEMA HMGP voluntary acquisitions in those areas. So most of the homes that are 37 feet or lower have already been acquired. We'll have to go back and look, but at this time, I'm not aware of any homes that we would have to buy out at the 37 feet. As we go through and like Nathan and Bob both said, we'll have to do a deeper analysis now regarding road raises and other transportation impacts to maintain access to those properties. There may be some additional properties, but I'm guessing it's less than 10 that we would have to acquire.
That would need to be acquired because we don't have the road access to get to them, that the house is high, but the road isn't.
Or mainly if we had to raise a road or do some sort of other infrastructure improvement to gain access for other homes, but because of that infrastructure improvement, maybe a home is too close to where a new bridge has to get built to get access in.
So roughly 10 plus whatever Nathan's going to say.
Yes.
Okay.
So as far as your first question, with the staging area shifts, the alignment shifts, as well as the reduction in the size of the staging area, we're seeing on the North Dakota side, 16 additional homes would have to get acquired, and those would all be within Cass County. We are also seeing a reduction on the Minnesota side of 14 homes that would no longer have to be acquired. So there's a net increase of 2, but between the two states, there's 16 in North Dakota and 14 less in Minnesota.
I think there's been, there's a lot of numbers that get tossed around, and then there's the structures number as well, so that is significantly more.
Yep, and those are residential structures.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Roger?
I'm going to ask a question and leave it up to the technical group if they want to answer it. And it has to do with impacts from a diversion that is actually upstream of Fargo-Moorhead area. And that's the diversion around the Breckenridge, Wapaton area, and the impacts from that project. And the impacts that we're looking at in Wilkin and Richland County right now, what we're presented here at so many acres, I'm wondering if there's consideration for the project in Breckenridge. And are we actually going to mitigate for those impacts? Or have you taken those into consideration and now our impacts are above that?
There are no specific considerations in this project for any impacts from that project. There has been some preliminary analysis to quantify downstream impacts from the Wapaton Breckenridge projects. And I think what it would be safe to say is that the impacts that we're currently showing, for example, in Richland and Wilkin County, are within the tolerance of from our project. The impacts from our project are really within the tolerance of downstream impacts from those projects, if that makes sense. They're of the same order of magnitude.
So if we're saying we're affecting 300 acres in Richland County, are you saying actually our project is half that? And the other half is from the Breckenridge project?
I'm not sure I would go quite that far, but I'm saying if we're talking about a few hundred acres one way or the other between an alternative and another alternative, we're within the tolerance.
I'll stop there.
Any other questions? Kevin?
We had an opportunity at our Clay County Board meeting last week to hear some of this presentation. I know, Mary, you were there as well. And I do want to stress the importance of what we started here too, was to get as many people as we can out of the dangers of flooding. And also to get as many as we can out of having to have flood insurance. Those are all critical components that impact our economy as well here. And I did want to raise something just for the diversion authorities, information that I raised with our presenters on this, and that has to do with the area of Georgetown. We haven't talked a lot about Georgetown, but it is the area where all of these bodies of water are going to join together. And there was a project done by the city of Georgetown to get them to obtain a 100-year level of flood insurance or flood protection. And the only thing that's holding that back is the fact that Highway 75 could not be closed off. And I really would encourage in our planning process through our technical people that we review that and see what it would take to, if we truly want to offer flood protection for all of our communities, and knowing that everything is going to flow to the north, that we do all we can to help out in that regard. And the preliminary numbers that we looked at are really insignificant in comparison to this project. It would probably require just a slight road raise on both the north and the south end of Georgetown. And I just want this board to know that I'm going to be, really watching that closely. I don't know that we can ever say with 100% certainty exactly what the final outcome is going to be from a flood when it gets to a certain area. And I think we owe it to those folks in Georgetown to try to help them complete their certification process. And I'll just leave my comments there for now.
Thank you, Kevin. No others? And obviously, we've been asking questions and questions and questions, and I really appreciate our technical advisory group who bear with us as as we try to understand each of the different scenarios that have been brought forward. With that, there's no more on this. We can move on to the outreach activities report, and then we'll go on to the application after that.
Rocky's at a Twins game. Not bitter, but I'm here.
Is he
to
really?
discuss. Yes.
Okay, we'll just remember to tease him.
Yeah, do more than that, please.
Okay.
Just wanted to give a brief update. As many of you know, we've been going around to several of the area jurisdictions providing an update similar to what you heard earlier. So this past week, we've been at City of Fargo, City of Moorhead, Clay County, Stanley Township, and then, of course, here the Diversion Authority. Over the next few weeks, we have another dozen or more presentations already scheduled, and then a few more that we're continuing to work on. So we've got kind of a calendar of events slated and, a listing with all those where we're sharing some information like this. I think the intent of all that was to share the new project. We realized that maybe the first go-round, we probably could have done a few things a little bit better in terms of outreach campaigns and that like. And I think commend all of yourselves for being part of those presentations and making sure we're getting information out to the people that are either impacted or benefited or otherwise interested in the project. So just wanted to share that. A few other things, we've, continuing to try to work on the website as we've seen an uptick of traffic, of course, with all the media release on the project. So the website is being updated as we go with some key information, and we'll continue to work on that.
Okay. Any other questions on outreach? Okay, thank you.
Just
Oh,
one
Mary.
quick question. Eric, on the website, can you drill down into the details of these maps that have been up here a little better or not?
One thing that we have added to the website, along with some of these maps that you've seen, we've added an interactive GIS feature. And so if you're on the website, you go to the maps page, there's a little banner that says interactive GIS, and you can click on that link, and then anybody can zoom in and out, look at the details, look at the alignments, look down to the parcel level. I will say there was some hesitation about showing that level of detail because, as the technical team noted, there's additional design work that needs to be done before this can be finalized. They've coined the term micrositing, and so they're probably nervous as I'm sharing this behind me, but we felt like there's enough interest in the public to understand where the project is and into that level of detail. So we've got some disclaimers on that online GIS web map, making sure that people know it's draft and micrositing is yet to come. So a lot of detail there.
And then also, especially for those folks that are newly impacted by this latest proposal, have you been reaching out to those individuals at this point, or do you have a plan in place?
Yeah, we've had conversations with probably at least half a dozen or more, maybe even close to a dozen now, of those property owners in Cass County that are newly impacted or were once on the north side and now on the south side. So we've been having those conversations. We know, again, that the project is due to some micrositing, and then there's some permit process, and the Clomer eventually will be developed. Best indications are that's probably a fall timeline before all those details, I guess, are settled in. And so we've been having some conversations. We've shared some information about the acquisition process with people, and we'll continue to be doing that, of course, over the next coming weeks and months.
Thank you.
Okay. Then we will move on to number 4, which is to review the Minnesota DNR permit application and approval for submission to Minnesota DNR. John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd prepared a suggested motion to authorize the submission, the chair and the co-executive directors to submit the permit application for the Minnesota Dam Safety and Public Waters Permit to Minnesota DNR. In addition to that, as part of the process, we also have to submit a formal letter to the Army Corps of Engineers just requesting that they look over the revisions that are contained within the permit. I can certainly answer any questions that you might have about that, but that would be the next step in the process.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Tim, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. Do we have any questions or comments before voting? Okay, all those in favor, well, I suppose this would be a,
Easy to say that, but.
this would be a individual one, right? You guys are so different over here. Would you do roll call, please?
Yes. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
And it is approved. With that, is there anything for the order of the group before we adjourn?
I'd
Okay.
just like to thank all the Diversion Authority members who've worked hard on this the last 6 months. I know a lot of you have done different politicking in Minnesota, North Dakota, and all over the states and in the town and in the communities. And this is a historic moment for us, as Tony says, in the step process to where we're going. So it's a tremendous turnaround. We're applying for a new permit, and it's a new step. And I think, Tony, as you said to our meeting, it's a path forward. So thank you for everybody for your hard work and the hard work that you do in the next 6 months.
I would echo Tim's, but I think we're all cognizant about how much work we have to do and how many things we need to get the word out and listen to people and get the kind of information that they need to also feel comfortable as we do. And we spent a lot of time learning about it. You know how long it took just to catch the drift. So it'll take a while to teach people and listen to what they're saying during this time frame too. So I appreciate the time that I know we're going to be doing, and good luck with that. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mary, second by Chuck. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign, and we are adjourned.